Hello and welcome everyone to today's virtual session hosted by the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. We have an incredible conversation for you today, really centered around our work we call the Venture Equity Project, which researches what makes successful regional entrepreneurial ecosystems. What does it take to open access to entrepreneurship for people of all backgrounds? And today's conversation is focused on the work being done in the state of Maryland. We have some incredible insights that will apply across regions and states, and we're excited to get into the conversation with you. In a minute, I'll ask our speakers to introduce themselves. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsors of this work, JP Morgan Chase and NASDAQ, for making this possible. Tom, I'd love to turn it over to you to start with our introductions, and then Elizabeth and Jack.
Well, thanks, Jessica, and hello, everybody. My name is Tom Regnanti. I'm a managing director at JP Morgan Chase. I'm born and raised in the New York area. I went to college at American University and did my MBA at George Washington University. I spent my 30-year career in banking and finance between New York, Washington, D.C., and Maryland. 11 years ago, JP Morgan Chase hired me as its first employee in Baltimore City to open up an office for our commercial bank at JP Morgan Chase. So from that time to today, we've grown a wonderful footprint of bank branches. We have over 30 bank branches throughout Greater Baltimore, including 6 here in the city. And we brought the rest of JP Morgan Chase to Maryland through investment banking, private banking, wealth management, and a full retail banking footprint. So proud to see the growth that we've had here in Maryland. Myself, I'm a resident of Baltimore City. So many of you will see me around town. I'm also active on a number of boards, including the Hippodrome Foundation and the World Trade Center Institute, and happy to be here today.
Wonderful, thank you. Over to Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am the advisor to TEDCO, both on investments as well as ecosystem development. I've been involved in TEDCO in some capacity for about 5 years now. I started as the interim chief investment officer, but my experience with TEDCO goes back a couple decades, actually. I grew up in Indiana, went to Duke for undergrad, UC San Diego for graduate school, where I got my master's in bioengineering, fell into a couple startup companies, got the startup bug, before moving to Baltimore about 25 years ago. When I came to Baltimore, quickly realized there wasn't much of a entrepreneurial community at the time. And so I found a position actually with the state of Maryland's venture fund that was housed with the Department of Commerce at the time, and got to really see and learn all about the Maryland ecosystem and fund a lot of the Maryland-based entrepreneurs. That venture fund eventually made its way over to TEDCO, and so I'm still involved and very active in the community. So looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and Jack.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Jack Miner. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at TEDCO. And like Elizabeth said, a lot of the work that she did really teed us up for success, I think, at TEDCO. And we'll talk about some of that in a bit. My background, undergrad from University of Michigan, then MBA from Northwestern, and have kind of carved out a bit of a niche as a dual mandate investment person. Was at the University of Michigan Tech Transfer Office, where we focused on advancing technologies from the university. After that, went to Cleveland Clinic, managed the Cleveland Clinic Venture Program. Again, dual mandate of investing in technologies that were transformative to the patients. And now here at TEDCO, we're focused on really making sure that we follow what the legislators have set up for us. And as I said, we'll talk a little bit more about TEDCO in a minute.
Thank you all. So we have a wonderful conversation prepared here today. The purpose is to really share insights from TEDCO, your work, Tom, what you're seeing from your seat at JP Morgan to help ecosystem development across the US. I think that the model TEDCO has can certainly be a model for others. And so in that spirit, we invite questions. We will spend the last 15 minutes of this conversation answering your questions. So please populate those either in the chat or Q&A. We will read them and try to get to as many as we can. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Tom to begin our conversation with Elizabeth and Jack.
Thanks, Jessica. I'd like to begin our conversation with information about TEDCO itself. So TEDCO has established itself as a catalyst for Maryland's innovation ecosystem. Could you share the history of TEDCO, how it's structured, and its vision for the future?
Do you want to go first, Elizabeth? And
Sure, I'll give the really historical perspective. We just celebrated TEDCO's 25th anniversary a year ago, I believe. TEDCO was created by the Maryland State Legislature. Its initial focus was really on to enhance the speed of commercialization of technologies coming out of the wealth of academic and federal labs that we have here in Maryland. So way back in the early 2000s, that's what they were really squarely focused on, really tech transfer, commercialization. They created some funding programs that supported innovators coming out of local federal labs and academic institutions. And over the years, we've been blessed to receive a lot of additional funding to continue to expand kind of the mission of TEDCO, but it's really squarely focused on commercialization of technologies.
And then I would only add to that some of the sister programs that we have, the Maryland Innovation Initiative, which really does exactly what Elizabeth was saying, and that's teasing technologies out of the research universities, and the Maryland Stem Cell Research Foundation, which also focuses on stem cell. And both of those programs, I believe, really elevate the effectiveness of TEDCO and our mission overall.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Jack, for that information. Could you discuss how TEDCO funds and programs are structured to support entrepreneurs from all communities, especially in the tech and life science spaces?
Yeah, I'll take that, and Elizabeth, you can pick up on anything I miss as I go through that. But we're a strategic direct investor on behalf of the state of Maryland, and all of our investments are based on statute and regulation. The money we get from the state really focuses on what the legislators want to double down on: life sciences, tech commercialization, employee growth, social impact, venture growth. And so each one of the programs that we invest in really are focused on those areas, again, that the legislators feel are important. I think every one of those also are focused on the natural resources, if you will, of Maryland in life sciences and in cyber because of what we have there, and the federal programs, again, access to the federal labs as well. All told, we have about $200 million in assets under management. Majority of that locked up in our portfolio, where we have about 150 portfolio companies that continue to advance in each one of those areas. And I'm sure I missed something, Elizabeth, on that.
I'll just tack on our funding is primarily, initially, it was almost exclusively funded with state of Maryland tax dollars. But in more recent years, we've, again, benefited from some federal programs, and now a lot of at least our direct investment programs are funded with some federal dollars as well. And our venture funds, many of them are one of the bigger ones, it's evergreen. So any returns that we have, we get to keep and reinvest in additional Maryland-based companies in the future.
That's great. As we talk about the areas of tech and life sciences, just curious, are there specific aspects of those sectors that you're particularly focused on and have seen some early success?
Um, you know, Interestingly enough, some quick successes in AI, which makes sense to me, is a little bit counter. We've already had a couple exits there. In our quantum computing, we have two of Maryland-based companies, IonQ, which has done very, very well. Not a TEDCO company, but a Maryland company that has done incredibly well. And then another company called Rigetti that we actually have had an exit of a couple of our companies into that. And so I think that when you look at the technology space, whether it's AI, where we're getting some interesting early exits, or whether it's quantum computing, we do a lot more than just life sciences for sure.
Thanks for that. I'd like to ask you about TEDCO's approach to the programs that you run and your funding patterns. Elizabeth, maybe to you, what key metrics have revealed the most meaningful insights about gaps in access to capital, and how has TEDCO adapted its outreach and programs in response?
So, so my current role with TEDCO is more on the data side, trying to understand, are we, reaching a very broad community? Is there general awareness? Are we getting applications from all races, genders, ethnicities, and geographic sections of the state? So, long story short, when we started asking ourselves this question, we really didn't have a lot of data. We could tell you who was in our portfolio and where they were located, but we didn't have a lot of hard data around who was applying and who was successfully making it through the funnel. So, but we did a lot of customer discovery. We went out and talked to our entrepreneurs who we had funded. We also talked to other entrepreneurs who we hadn't funded, and really tried to better understand how they learned about us, who told them about us, and if they hadn't come to TEDCO for funding early on, why not? And what we learned was a lot of folks, particularly underrepresented individuals, they didn't know that TEDCO existed. They weren't necessarily operating in the same, contact circles as some of the traditional investors. And so we've really had to make a concerted effort to make sure that we are actively reaching out to different communities, using different methods of communication to reach different communities, and really making sure we're throwing out a very broad, wide net to ensure that everybody at least has the opportunity to compete.
Jack, anything to add?
No, I think that, again, largely, and it's not false flattery. I mean, largely because of a lot of the work that Elizabeth and the team did before I joined 4 years ago, those programs were in motion. And, I think one of the things that we look at is, what is the performance of the investments that we have? And the one thing that I'm most proud of, the work that the team has done, is that 56% of the investments that we've made have been made to historically underrepresented founders. The national average is something like 2 to 3, maybe 5% in some regions. So we're at least 10x what the national average is on that. And I think that the team's doing a great job of filling top of funnel to address that.
And I can just jump in some more. So we're, initially we would only obviously look at applications that were showing up on our desk. And so again, we're making a concerted effort to get the word out, to get more applications, broader community. But now we are actually collecting demographic data at the time that they're submitting that application. And then we're also tracking demographic data, who's making it through the pipeline. So if we're seeing large gaps in, who's applying versus who's getting funded, we can ask ourselves, we can talk to the entrepreneurs some questions about like why is that? Is, we are definitely a merit-based investor. Merit comes first, but we're looking to better understand those trends. And so we have identified gaps, particularly for underrepresented entrepreneurs who oftentimes lack that startup capital to fund that initial prototype. So basically, we're taking the data that we're collecting and using it to go to Maryland legislature and say, hey, we've identified this need. These entrepreneurs can't compete because they don't have the same access to resources. They don't have the friends and family or access to angel capital to fund some of that really, really early work. So let's put together, a new program, our concept capital or whatever it is, our builder fund or social impact funds to ensure that these entrepreneurs have the same access and to resources to become a viable venture-backed company down the road.
And that's all such great news and just such a wonderful trajectory. I hear that Maryland, the state of Maryland, is one of the leading states in supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs and founders. And so I feel like we have a secret sauce here in Maryland that could be exported to the rest of the country. Wanted to ask there, what is it about Maryland, the leadership here, the community that puts us in the forefront of investing in traditionally underrepresented areas?
Yeah, I think I'll just, double down on what Elizabeth said. We don't invest any differently than any other investor. Everything starts with merit and then we go from there. We do have our regulations, which say that, for example, a life sciences company has to be FDA, have FDA somewhere in their path. But everything starts with, is it a good company? I think the biggest difference that I see, and remember, this is the third state. I worked in Michigan, I worked in Ohio, and now I've worked here. The biggest difference is that it's where we go. It's where we fill top of funnel. We fill top of funnel at the HBCUs, at women's entrepreneurship programs, at people of color, at Hispanic programs. We go to different programs. And I think that that was probably the most profound thing that I learned doing this job is that if you always go to the same places, you're always going to get the same results, right? And so what we purposefully do is go everywhere that we can go where we see need, exactly like Elizabeth was saying.
Yeah, we've created some programs. We have something called the Urban Business and Innovation Initiative, as well as the Rural Business Innovation Initiative. So we are going into places that maybe a lot of other investors aren't typically looking. So we're going into Baltimore City and Prince George's County, and we, making individuals available. So serial entrepreneurs with expertise are directly interacting with individuals in the community to work with their ideas, to coach them along until they really are ready to take advantage of some of TEDCO's programs. Same with rural. In the rural communities, we have consultants out there basically working directly with our entrepreneurs, connecting them with resources with the goal of getting them to the point where they can really compete head to head with other folks that might be more traditional investor-ready companies.
That's great to hear. I hear a lot about TEDCO as just a strong collaborator for the business community, for the entrepreneurial community, many partnerships. And I imagine that building the support networks that you have requires strong partnerships in so many areas. Could you share with us any examples of successful collaborations you've had with different organizations that have helped expand access to capital and resources for the entrepreneurs that you're serving?
So I think that I'll let Elizabeth bail me out as I forget some key stakeholders here. And it's always risky to go and start talking through the list of all the people that we work with. We work with a lot of different organizations from the Eastern Shore to the Western part of Maryland. And so we have a lot of different incubators that we work with without naming names. We have some incubators that are focused on drug development, some that are focused on 3D printing for minimally viable products. We have other incubators that we work with that are focused on green tech, clean tech, and blue tech. And again, kind of going back to what are the natural resources that we have here in Maryland. I think the other programs that we partner with are the programs that really are focused on increasing our access to diverse communities, whether that's urban or rural, working with those individuals and those individual organizations as well. And I think one of the most important areas that we probably collaborate the most are other investment programs. So other venture funds, other early stage investors, so important for these companies as they're coming through to show that there's some momentum. We're happy to write the first check. We're happy to write a $100,000 check for a $500,000 round, but getting those other investors involved are really important to us at that early stage. And then being allowed to continue to protect our pro rata at the later stages in the growth stage as well. So I think, it's not always about money. It's everything, right? It's the relationships, it's the technology, it's the talent associated with it. But when it comes to the money, the programs that I'm responsible for, it's really important that we find ways to syndicate those deals with other key investors in the region.
I'll just add that Maryland's a relatively small state, and we've tried to stay focused on becoming like the partner of choice, whether it's universities, federal labs, the incubators, the investors. We have to work well with everyone. We know we are more than happy to let others lead on some initiatives, and we lead on other initiatives. We regularly compete for large, types of federal grants and support that. So I think we're just kind of viewed as a partner of choice in the community. And we've even, we want to reach across state borders to learn from what our friends and neighboring states are doing as well, because we recognize that there are plenty of folks that are traveling across state lines for their jobs, and we want to make sure those companies are just as successful. So we'll basically work with anyone.
Well, it's just amazing to see the outreach you've had, and the collaborations are just so important. I wanted to ask, for any potential entrepreneurs out there that want to get in touch with TEDCO, could you share just sort of high level, what is it that an investor should come to the table with when they meet with folks at TEDCO? What advice would you have?
An investor or a founder?
A founder.
A founder. The companies that any investor wants to invest in are the companies that don't want their money. Right? It's like the less they want your money, the less they need your money, the more you want to participate in that. And I think that founders can demonstrate that by really showing how much they have figured out, that they figured out their market, that they've figured out all of the management issues. They've got the right team in place. They've got the right message in place. Elizabeth works a lot with ICOR as well, and doing that customer discovery is a really key part of the National Science Foundation program. Those companies that come to us that have gone through those ICOR programs are really light years ahead, and we like those. Now, we also, if I could maybe change that a little bit, we also get founders who come to us and they have an idea, but they don't have it really well formulated, whether it's the technology or the team. And we have a venture development program that is relatively new at TEDCO, which will sit down and work with the founder and do exactly that, which would stand up the company, get the business plan, get the investor deck to the point where I look at that and I'm like, this is a great company that we want to invest in. But the short answer to your question is that the better prepared that founder is, the more we're interested in investing in them.
And I'll just add that typically we like to see them have some level of validation that that the technology is kind of working, whether it's some prototype or initial, a customer as a beta site, or some NIH dollars through an SBIR grant. So some level of validation is certainly helpful for most of our programs versus a idea on a napkin. We're going to probably send you over to our venture development team to get some work and help you identify some grants that might be appropriate to get you to that proof of concept stage.
Well, those are all important insights for our viewers to learn how to gain access. I wanted to ask, there's a lot of different organizations listening in today, which is great. And so for those, around the room who are looking to expand economic opportunity, within their own organization, within, various regions around Maryland, what key lessons might you have for them to get going in their own markets with the work that you've done?
I'll start again, Elizabeth, purely because of the lens of the Michigan, Ohio, and now Maryland view. The one thing that I find about Maryland that is so impressive is that all of these different programs don't dilute each other's efforts. It's very much a collaboration. It's not, hey, they started up a company, so we can't claim that. It's we started up a company as a region or as a state. And I think that's the biggest difference that I've seen. Everybody has money, everybody has technology, everybody's got research, everybody's got talent. But the big difference, I think, in Maryland is that we don't dilute each other's efforts. We work very, very hard to be supportive of each other.
And I'll just add that, it's really hard to change something that you don't measure. So you have to make the effort in figuring out how, what metrics matter to you and how you're going to go about collecting that data and measuring it and trying to improve it. So trying to ensure that, again, a wide range of entrepreneurs were aware of TEDCO and the resources we had, the funding that we had. We had to make sure that we had a system in place to go collect that data and see if we're moving the needle in terms of broadening the participation.
Oh, that all makes a lot of sense. Very helpful. I wanted to ask, if we could pull out our crystal balls here, Elizabeth and Jack. What do you see as the future of TEDCO, and particularly, the exciting growth we've seen in tech and life sciences here in Maryland, and TEDCO's important role. Take us out a few years. What would you like to see as the market expands and the future is in front of us?
You want to go first, Elizabeth?
Sure. I mean, I think, exits speak volumes. So, Maryland and TEDCO have certainly had exits in the past. I think they're not coming as quickly as any investor would like, but I'm hoping that the success stories that we share in the next 5 years are going to really showcase a wide variety of individuals. From first-time entrepreneurs, from underrepresented background to rural entrepreneurs, just showing that basically everybody has the ability to be successful in this space. You don't have to know somebody and come from the right pedigree to succeed as a tech entrepreneur. So I think that's one of the goals I hope we can reach.
Yeah, I'll add to that I think one of the things that TEDCO does very, very well is it stays as much ahead of programs as it can, whether it's modifications to diversity, equality, inclusion, and making sure that we are aligned with our legislators, whether it's adopting and adapting to federal programs and some of the challenges in accessing capital there. We've got programs in place right now within federal programs for those companies that have institutional grants to help them out. We work very closely with banks like JP Morgan to try to ensure that they don't have to turn the lights out in between the time before submitting and receiving a check within these federal research programs. But I think, overall, again, from an investment standpoint, the state that figures out how to adapt this new talent pool, which is computer programmers can be anywhere in the world, and to have a focus on where the computer programmer actually physically resides as a metric for a qualified business is a little bit 1980s, a little bit 1990s. Certainly not the current reality. And I think the state that figures that out is going to really do well. And I think that the state is figuring that out. And I also think that Maryland is figuring out that it's not just venture capital, it's also private equity. We've got 150 companies in our portfolio. Is there a roll-up strategy within that that we can assist in, not necessarily take a leadership role in, but assist in that and add, 2 and 2 and come up with 6 because of the economies of scale of those portfolio companies. So the sky's the limit with respect to what we can do regionally. From a state, we will always honor the laws that we have and respect what the legislators have outlined for us. But we think we can also do more relative to what they want us to do on a regional level above and beyond that.
That's great to hear, Jack and Elizabeth. I mean, we believe Maryland is quite a sophisticated market. It's such a great place for entrepreneurship, and technology and life sciences and so many other sectors. And it's good to hear, all the incredible work that TEDCO is doing, to partner so closely with our state, with our legislators, with our entrepreneurs, and really leading the charge for this sector and such an important topic today. I thought I would just pause and invite listeners to submit their questions. And Jessica, I might ask, do we have questions for the panel?
We do. We got several questions in advance, and then we've gotten a few as we've had the discussion. I'd like to start, Jack, with the point you just made about, we're living in a more borderless world from a talent perspective. Entrepreneurs can be anywhere, and it is really interesting to think about TEDCO's roots as a state-based and state-funded organization. How do you adapt to that? We have a question from the audience. Do you invest in Pennsylvania, or does something similar exist in Pennsylvania? But would love to ask what the future looks like for TEDCO, how you might be that leader that kind of shows other states. Certainly, there are other state funds out there. Michigan just signed a new one into law. In Pennsylvania, there is Benjamin Franklin Technology Partners. But yeah, how do you think about adapting to the talent pool as it's not necessarily, maybe they live half the year in Maryland and half the year somewhere else? It's a really interesting question. And how would you look at a Pennsylvania-based entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think so. You said it just to answer that one question. So the Ben Franklin organization, Scott Nissenbaum does a great job in Pennsylvania, and so they are the oldest organization in the country for doing what we do. We're the second oldest, so we're kind of from the same family from that standpoint. We would not invest in a company outside of the state of Maryland. With the current legislation that we have, we're prohibited from doing that. I think that as we start to look at what that means is what really does that mean? What's the economic impact of having a technology that is from here, or a founder that is from here, or investors that come back here? And I think that that's really what it's going to be, is more of an affinity to the region or an affinity to the state as the metric for making them a qualified business. And you see it all the time with companies that were founded out of the University of Maryland. They become big, they move to California, and guess what? The founders come back with their families. They come back here. So losing out on those financial returns between the time they move to California and become millionaires and the time they come back and raise their family is financially uh, not the best, suboptimal, right? So
Mhm.
how do you keep that whole spectrum of return from a financial standpoint? So I think it really is going to come down to what's the affinity to the region? Is it talent? Is it treasure? Is it the technology? What is it that we have as an affinity? How do you wrap that up into a nice bow so that the legislators can feel good about we're doing something good for the taxpayers here? Because I'm not naive to think that if it's without taxpayer benefit, we wouldn't do it.
I think that's what you're talking about. What is it? How do you have a stickiness for a region? How do you have an affinity so that folks who are successful either come back or stay and build their companies? That's really the heart and soul of our work at the Venture Equity Project. What are the factors that create supportive entrepreneurial ecosystems? Widening the lens, and I'd like to get your all's thoughts on this. One thing we look at is state and federal policy. So some trends in public policy at the state level we observed in our research last year was that more states are looking to how to support the entrepreneur holistically. For example, in this country, healthcare tends to be tied to being an employee of a company that provides healthcare benefits. So how can you provide kind of wraparound services for entrepreneurs? Childcare is included in that. But yeah, I'd love to learn more, like broadly, does public policy or other factors you think play a role in making Maryland a good place for entrepreneurs? Access to capital can be another. Tom, you all, of course, provide a range of capital products. So I'd love to hear from all of you, like, what do you think makes Maryland, from a broad lens, policy, environment, access to capital, a win for entrepreneurs to locate their companies and their families?
I'll just start and say that, historically, I think Maryland has a track record of being a great place to start a company. We do struggle sometimes at that next growth stage. For some of our life science companies, we don't always have enough wet lab space, enough kind of growth stage space to move into. We're geographically constrained, kind of some high rents, but also just a lack of, particularly around Baltimore City, of wet lab space. So we've had a number of companies that have had to move to other states to either access capital space or that kind of serial entrepreneurial talent, that C-level talent. We have a lot of scientists turned entrepreneurs, but we don't have as many people who have actually been the CEO before, know how to do it, have the connection to the venture world that might be required to get the company to the next stage. So we don't have all the answers yet to all those problems. I think, like many states, we wish we had more access to capital here locally. But I think as a nation, it's pretty condensed into a couple spots right now.
Yeah, I would say that in Maryland, what we always have going for us is we have a number of natural assets. I mean, it's Maryland is the state with the highest amount of waterfront per capita. So it's a great place to live. You can drive from one side of the state to another in the same day and go from the Atlantic Ocean to beautiful mountains out west. We have a very developed transportation network here, which is very appealing. Certainly, the education sector here is second to none. We've always been known as an education state, highly educated workforce, a real strong aspect and growth in all areas of education, public education, private education, parochial schools. I mean, we have it all here in Maryland. That's really what we've been known for. And then if you look around Maryland as a state to grow a business, our city, suburban, and rural areas, within a relatively small state are amazing. You can spend time in Baltimore, out to Annapolis, to the Washington, D.C. area, then out to Frederick, and then every place in between is full of entrepreneurs, businesses that have been very successful, multi-generational businesses here now spinning off to entrepreneurial ventures for the next generations. So I think all of that really speaks to the strength of Maryland as an economically strong state. And I think good partnerships throughout the years with the state legislature has been important. And I know that that is becoming more top of mind for our legislators to make sure that Maryland is a strong and economically viable state, particularly for entrepreneurs who are trying to grow a business here.
Yeah, I have very little to add to that, other than wishing that I could channel Governor Moore's recitation of the number of PhDs that we have in this state and the quality of life that we have here and the cost of living and things that I wouldn't even try to pretend to recite those. But they're all true. And I think that that's an important part of it. I think the other thing is, look, this is an old state. There's a lot of people who've been here for a very long time. And I don't know, Tom, if you know this, but I know Elizabeth does, that when somebody says, what school did you go to? They don't mean like what university did you go to? They mean what elementary school did you go to? Because they have equal friends there. That I think is what makes Maryland the most powerful, is that the connections that you have, lifelong connections, and being able to solve problems that you face as an entrepreneur really depend on that ability to, go to your network and you're two phone calls away. There's a benefit to being a small state. Everybody knows everybody. Just don't make a mistake because everybody will find out.
Jack, well, I heard a bunch of things. One, education being very strong. That's something we're certainly looking into. Seeing direct correlations between educational attainment and entrepreneurship. We're exploring that. And then harder to measure, but the connectedness of communities is something we see is very important. And it's interesting to think perhaps a smaller state does have advantages in that regard, because you do have relationships, from what capital and ideas flow from, and that's a way to build partnerships. So would love to think with you all about ways to measure connectedness, because it can feel like a softer metric, but it is a crucial ingredient. And then I want to draw on something, Elizabeth, you brought up, which is also thinking about constraints, which is, you mentioned the constraint around wet lab space. And I think it's an interesting question for you all to think about what constraints, lab space, capital, you mentioned, does TEDCO and JP Morgan think about that you really want to solve for entrepreneurs? We see, across the US, really access to that pre-seed stage capital is a challenge. The friends and family or angel capital, that's a national challenge that we see different states approaching. But what are the big constraints on your minds as you go forward and try to promote the growth of entrepreneurship in Maryland?
I would say that TEDCO thinks about this stuff every day. It's definitely part of our legislative agenda. We work with the legislators, obviously down in Annapolis, to help think through things that we can do to address these issues. We had a big Equitech bill get passed a year or two ago that's providing some of that funding to address some of those more infrastructure related constraints. So again, it's all partnerships. TEDCO's finances can't solve a lot of this by itself, but we're working with our partner organizations to get creative and again, applied together for funding to address some of these constraints.
Mm-hmm.
And Jessica, you're talking about connectivity, and when I think about that in the context of Maryland, there are many companies who want to locate here. There are large companies who are investing here. They may not be headquartered in Maryland, but they look to Maryland market as terrific demographics for so many industries, and particularly to attract entrepreneurs to grow a business here. In our case at JP Morgan Chase, we're investing heavily throughout Maryland for the long term. Just a couple of years ago, we announced just in Baltimore City proper a $20 million investment to go primarily to support equitable growth, equitable economic growth opportunities in the city to support underserved communities. And that investment it's well on its way to fruition, and by 2027 we'll be fully invested. And we're just one of many firms, financial firms and otherwise, who look at Maryland as a place to go. Look at Baltimore, Annapolis, the Washington suburbs out west of Frederick, as areas of growth and opportunity. And it's up to all of us to help connect our communities to resources. And people like TEDCO really are leading the way. And many organizations look at how we can build a pie and expand access to all. And I think Maryland does a particularly good job of trying to figure out, from every organization I've been a part of, how do we expand access, how do we expand connectivity, how do we bring more people here to Maryland and expand the pie.
I think, yeah, that partnership, and it sounds like there's a lot of connectivity in Maryland. I want to focus, and this is a question we got in advance. You all have referenced working with the state legislature a lot. I know that's part of your work, part of your origins at TEDCO. I think that working with policymakers tends to be a bit of a black box for folks who haven't done it before. I know that many folks who are in the entrepreneurial development space, in nonprofit organizations, even on the policymaker side, are wondering, like, how do we really bridge the gap between the innovation ecosystem and what policy can do? I think most entrepreneurs, when they think of where they're going to get their support, they're not thinking of government as a resource. So if you could speak to the policymakers and the entrepreneurial support organizations outside of Maryland, like, what does it take to work productively with a state legislator or governor's office? What does that process really look like? Because I think for many, those communication streams feel maybe out of reach or irrelevant. And what we know from TEDCO is no, they're neither out of reach nor irrelevant. So would love to hear some kind of guidance from you all how to approach that policy entrepreneurship bridge.
I mean, I could start and just say, I think it's true probably for any industry. You have to identify who are the legislators who actually speak that language. Don't pretend that all legislators in Annapolis know the ins and out of the tech world, the investment world, cyber, life science. It's foreign language to many. So you have to have identified key stakeholders who do know this space, and they become your champions. You have to know who the key people are on different committees. So, I mean, we have a government affairs team, obviously, at TEDCO. And again, it's a huge resource, and they know whoever, their job is to know who all the key people are. They bring in, we help provide companies to speak to legislative groups to educate them around the value of stem cell research and how Maryland economically benefits by supporting this. We identify female founders, underrepresented founders. We bring in our big success stories. We bring in companies who are like, we can't find space. We need, more wet lab space, to really bring home, personalize their needs. So a big part of our effort at TEDCO is making sure we're doing the storytelling to the right audiences, so they hear loud and clear what we need, what's working, what's not working, and why we need new programs.
And I'm imagining data probably plays a big role.
Yeah, and data certainly helps. Yes.
Yeah, I think that you need, and I think TEDCO does a very good job, especially our CEO, having that entrepreneur mindset. What can we do to make things better? What can we do to improve things? So very much an entrepreneur's mindset. but then having a bureaucrat's time frame. So
Mhm.
having that, and it's almost like you can't really have both, right? But I think that's the needle that you have to thread, because the policymakers need to be patient in seeing the results of the law after it's in place. If you say we're going to put $5 million into a certain fund, and after 3 years you're like, we don't see any results, we're pulling it, you've not even deployed 60% of that money yet. So the policymakers need to be patient after the law is passed. The person putting the law into place has to be as patient as a drug developer, because policies die many times, just like a drug dies many times before it gets to market. I think that in Annapolis, a law will die 3 times before it's actually passed. I don't know if that's standard across the country. I also don't know if I should have ever said that out loud, but that seems to be what happens. And so you have to be patient. You have to have that entrepreneur's mindset, but then have that bureaucrat's time frame, and then be patient on both sides. That patient to get the law passed, and then patient to see it come to fruition, because we're seeing it right now. In our builder funds, we just had our very first exit, and it's going to be a 2.5x exit on money that we deployed 2.5 years ago. That's really fast, but it's very exciting. And we've got the other funds where we've got investments that are locked up. Like I said, that patience will pay off as long as you keep the programs in place.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Patient capital paired with patient policy.
Yeah.
Um, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, really just to add, we talk about, working with legislators. So certainly the data and the storytelling is important, as Elizabeth mentioned. You have to have that. But at the same time, we have to remind our legislators that we do speak from the same sheet of music when it comes to economic growth and economic development. Um, we all talk about how important it is for equal access and equal opportunity. So we in the business and economic development area talk about it, and we walk the walk. I know our legislators want to do the same. So really, we have to build those bridges of understanding about how important this really is. And this way we can prioritize economic development, access to capital, providing funding to entrepreneurs at the state level, and how important that is. And it should be at the forefront of the state when they're looking at dollars and how to allocate funds and programs to support. This to me is as important as anything that the state's looking at.
Mhm. Well, I think folks who are outside of the state of Maryland can take a lot from this discussion. Certainly storytelling, leveraging your own data, making sure legislators understand what the impact of entrepreneurship is on economic growth for the state. And I think I'll ask one final question, which is, you all talked about the strength of networks within Maryland. I think for entrepreneurs, particularly those you serve, may be curious about the strength of your networks nationally. Just looking at the PitchBook data, about 1.8 billion in venture capital went into Maryland-based companies last year in 2024, which puts it basically in the top half of states getting venture capital. But as Elizabeth mentioned, it's really New York, California, and Massachusetts taking the lion's share of venture capital investment. So how do you all think about building relationships with capital providers, whether they be venture capital investors, lenders, private equity investors nationally, to the benefit of your Maryland-based companies? And is that a priority?
Yeah, that's you said it exactly right. It's creating those relationships to the benefit of the company. We're a fiduciary to the state, but we have to take care of our portfolio company. And so making those introductions sometimes cost us, that somebody will put a $10 million investment into a company only if they move their headquarters. I think that's just cost of doing business. And, our value is significantly diminished if we don't have those relationships. And growth capital is really important to these companies as they start to mature. And you need to get capital outside of the region. And it really doesn't matter what region you're in, except for the ones that Elizabeth talked about. You've got to have those relationships. So it's our dual mandate, economic development, financial returns, at one time or sometime during that process, it switches, right?
Mhm.
And we try to get as good of financial returns as we can.
Mhm. And that often necessitates having relationships across the US.
That's right.
And yeah, Tom, how do you think about building relationships beyond Maryland from your seat at JP Morgan?
Well, we're very fortunate to have a wonderful network of capital providers, throughout the U.S. and indeed all around the world, given the size of our business and the scope of our relationships. Um, and I would say to all of us, here in Maryland, supporting the business community and the companies here, um, really is incumbent upon us to tell the Maryland story, tell the story of these companies, to share why Maryland, why would venture capital, private equity invest in companies here, and indeed help retain the location of the company here in Maryland. So I think it's really it speaks to the collaboration that my TEDCO panelists had talked about earlier, how we are collaborating, telling our story, the outreach to entrepreneurs around the country, and certainly the VC community is so important. And to make sure that those investors understand what we have here in Maryland, and that we'd love to bring more potential capital here.
Well, I hope that Maryland entrepreneurs are listening to this webinar and certainly the recording after, because you all have so many insights and resources to share. We did feature TEDCO in our 2024 research report as one of the 7 case studies of organizations that are really moving the ball forward for entrepreneurs, and encourage you all to download that report and really dig into more of the data and insights from TEDCO, because they do stand as a national example of what's possible at the state level. I want to thank everyone for being here for this conversation. And any final thoughts before we part?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for talking about this important subject.
You.
Thank you, and thank you for leading this show, Jessica, and for NASDAQ's important work. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Wonderful. Well, everyone take care, and please follow up both with JP Morgan and TEDCO. Sounds like there is a lot going on, and we look forward to publishing more research on what it takes to build successful regional entrepreneurial ecosystems. Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.